Ty Brooks, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Ty the Bourbon Guy.
Ty the Bourbon Guy.
We're having quite a day here. So we just rolled up. We are in Westfield, Indiana, right?
That's correct.
Just a bit north of Indianapolis, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
And I reached out to you because I wanted to talk bourbon. This is your thing.
Yeah.
But even as we're waiting, I left my battery in the car, and it turns out you and I are related.
We're family.
Which is such kind of a Midwest thing.
Right.
But just so happened that your mom's here
Yep.
and starts naming off my family members, which was a little scary for just a second
Right.
until I realized, no, she really does know them.
Right.
We haven't done the math on exactly how. Cousins somewhere. Something
We're cousins.
somehow.
Yep.
I love that.
So enjoy the whiskey.
This is a real celebration now today then.
Yeah.
That's very cool. So, but let's get into the podcast. Let's get in here to what you wanted to talk about, all the things
absolutely.
you do. So I found you obviously because you got a big thing going on with bourbon, and you said come by and we'll have some bourbon.
Sure.
And by some, apparently you meant like a lot of your
All
cabinet.
of the bourbon.
Yeah, all the kinds we can.
Yeah.
First of all, let's start here. What are we starting with today? What have you poured for me here?
Yeah. So this is Elijah Craig small batch. So Heaven Hill in Kentucky makes Elijah Craig. So this is one, like if somebody is relatively new to bourbon, this is kind of one of those ones. There's a few that I kind of go to and say, try this and see what you like and what you like about it or don't like. So that would be this one. So this is Elijah Craig.
That's good, man.
Yeah.
We've already got some of the best bourbon I've already had now, and we're just starting, aren't we?
There you go. Yeah.
Man, that's awesome.
Yeah.
How did the bourbon thing all get started with you?
So I've been into bourbon, just enjoying it myself, and maybe around 2012. I was in college. So the bourbon I have now is a little different than what I had in college, right?
Fair enough.
But, basically I was kind of like the bourbon guy even back then, even though I got a bottle of Maker's Mark, and, I had fraternity brothers coming over, and, I'd pour them the bourbon. That was like my thing. And so I've always enjoyed bourbon. And then probably around 2014, I moved here to Indianapolis from Virginia. And, every weekend we'd go to a liquor store and just find a new bottle that we hadn't tried. And then I actually met my now wife. And one of our dates early on, we went to the Bourbon Trail. And she's like, let's go and check it out. And so I learned so much more about bourbon then. And that's where the passion, I think, came in.
Nice.
And then, so I'm like, oh man, I got to get that bottle. I got to try that bottle. I want to try this one. And she actually was the one that had the idea of, why don't you post, because at the time, I'm getting one bottle and I'm drinking that bottle.
Yeah.
And then when that's done, I'll go get another one and, go through that one. So she was the one that had the idea of, why don't you post on Instagram the bottles that you've had that way? Because you're never going to remember all these bottles. And so I said, well, I'll start my own Instagram. And it sounds kind of weird to say now, because I think there's tons of whiskey, Instagram pages, but back then there really wasn't too many. And so, because this would have been 2014, 2015 type time frame. And so I just started it and would post whatever picture of a bottle that I got back then. And then I realized there was other people that had the same passion as I did and that knew a lot more about it than I did. And so that's kind of how it all got started. And
Nice.
It just kind of grew from there.
Yeah. So does that mean that your wife is also into bourbon? She's definitely supports this.
Yeah.
But is she also a connoisseur like you?
Sure. Yeah.
Something you
She's,
guys do together?
there's plenty of times where, she'll go down to the basement and grab something that she likes. And Elijah Craig is one that she really enjoys. In fact, all three of these that I have sitting up front are ones that she enjoys. But no, it's fun because she, not only supports it, but enjoys it as well. And, I mentioned earlier, we have a 1-year-old, so she didn't, I had a DD for a little bit and, and so she wasn't obviously drinking then. And so now she's kind of getting back into it. But yeah, she enjoys it as well. So
Nice.
That's always a plus.
Yeah, it's very helpful to have a spouse who will drive you around. Andrea dropped me off today because I was like, I feel like we might be drinking. And this taster you poured me is really more like a full shot. So I'm seeing how many we've got here, maybe 12 or so. 11, I think. Yeah.
Yep.
So that'll be something. No, man, first of all, that is delicious.
Yeah.
I was reading up a little. I tried to read up just a little bit about what we're going to talk about bourbon. It was really kind of fascinating to hear because the understanding I had always had was that it has to come from Kentucky. That's the thing, which apparently is a real thing and has been around since like the 1870s or something. But I didn't know anything else about it. I didn't recognize just what made it so unique. I know it doesn't taste like when you get some Irish whiskey. It's a totally different thing.
Yep.
That's got to do all with the charring, right? It's like that process.
Yep. Part of it. So there's Kentucky straight bourbon. So Kentucky straight bourbon obviously has to be from Kentucky, but bourbon itself is an American product. So that means that bourbon can be made anywhere in the United States. And to me, that's really cool. I think in this, people call it the Bourbon Boom right now because it's just kind of taken off, right?
Yeah, for sure.
But for me, it's, there are bottles that I used to be able to walk into a liquor store and it just sat there and liquor stores would mark it on sale and 50% off, and nobody would buy these bottles, and now they're like impossible to find. And so some people kind of don't like that, but for me, I love the Bourbon Boom because there's so much. Now we're seeing so much from other states that are. There's actually a bottle here, Redwood Empire. That's, they're based out of California. There's some out of Washington State. There's a lot out of Texas. Some out of New York. Tennessee, obviously, Indiana. I mean, so it's growing. It's going everywhere.
What do you think that is? What's drawing people into bourbon and making it kind of like, because I feel like there's a lot of these. I've talked before on this podcast about how I think the world is getting really like niched, like because of the internet, because of places. I always think of Reddit in this sense, where you've got like a community where we can really heavily focus on this one thing. And it sort of becomes, it can get competitive. It's almost like who knows more about that thing than the next guy. Right. But I guess bourbon has been swept up kind of in that movement. You got your coffee guys, you got your wine people who've been around forever doing that. Right. But it's part of like kind of the gourmet uprising happening, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that, and this is the way it's always been explained to me, and a lot of the things I look at, is that this was, quote unquote, your grandfather's drink. So whiskey is something that you kind of, the old man's drink or something like that. And the more, kind of like you said, the more that people get into something, and then you start realizing like, no, this isn't. There's so many people of all different backgrounds that are into bourbon and into whiskey, and just all different types of people that are into it that are really knowledgeable and doing a lot with it. And it's just been really cool. I do think that the age of information, right? So we can look up, where this is coming from. And I do think that bourbon of the past, when they were kind of trying to market certain things or maybe hide what they were doing, I think that that's kind of, in my opinion, that's not what the consumer wants anymore. The consumer wants very transparent companies. And, even if you didn't make that whiskey, you just bottled it, where did you get it from? And, just things like that. How old is that whiskey that's in there? So if it's 5 years old and not 10, just tell me it's 5 years old. I'll still buy it. I'll still enjoy it, right? But just tell me that. So, yeah. So different things like that. But
man, I'm all about that kind of transparency too, especially in labeling. Like the thing that Andrea and I are really into is meat. And we've over the years gotten better at buying meat where we're like, okay, what does grass-fed mean? What does that really mean for this animal? What does pasture-raised mean? What is grass-fed, grain-finished? And then it's crazy when you get to like eggs because you've got like, these ones are not fed soy. These ones are cage-free. These ones are free-range. Right. And there's all these words that bounce around. There's really, legal definitions that go behind all of those words. But marketers, unfortunately, like myself, are really clever at putting the words on to make you kind of think this is a better product than that one. Right. I don't know why pasture-raised sounds better than grass-fed, but it might mean that they're just kind of in a large lot eating corn. You just don't know. Right. But if there's anything that makes me happy, it's that it does feel like people like you and me who are really careful about the products that we care about and buy, they're being labeled better. We want that transparency. I'm done buying just the pack of meat from the store. Like, you better tell me about the animal. We better have some cameras, like live feeding these chickens, and I can watch them. And be like,
I need to see that's my chicken that I'm eating. Yeah.
But it's the same thing within bourbon, and I assume, right, is that more distilleries are having tours, and it's just more open.
Yeah, just more open, and one of the things that I see often, so with a lot of my friends and family, people that, because they know me as the bourbon guy, I get a lot of these questions, and I get the same ones over and over again. So that tells me that maybe companies are still not doing as good of a job. And But one of the things I see a lot is small batch. So small batch, this Elijah Craig that we're drinking is considered a small batch bourbon.
Okay.
Heaven Hill Distillery is a massive distillery, right? Versus a local craft, that's just in the Indianapolis area. Heaven Hill is going to distribute a lot more and produce a lot more. So when something is small batch for them, that may still be thousands of barrels that they mix together.
Right.
So something like that. But there's and I never, you talked about Reddit. Some of that stuff I try to stay away from because,
it's a black
it could
pit.
be,
it's a big hole.
There could be some pretentiousness out there.
For sure.
And, if at one point I didn't know anything about it, right? And somebody explained it to me. And so that's what I try to do with other people. And, whatever question they ask me, I just roll with it. And small batch is always one that comes up. So it says small batch on the label. That must mean, it's exclusive or it's,
right.
Single barrel. That is a true statement because that's coming from one barrel.
That's kind of a unique thing that you bringing that up. I hadn't thought about that, but if you have single barrel type stuff, every one is going to be slightly different from
Absolutely.
each other. So you really do have a pretty unique product. It's like one of, I don't know how many bottles you get out of a barrel.
Right.
You might know that off the top of your head, but
it's typically around, I would say 220-ish.
Okay, so that's like limited edition almost.
Right.
It's like this barrel.
Absolutely. So I just covered this. I do live streams every week, and one of the previous episode I just did, people always ask me, what's the most rare bottle that you have? And the way that I explain it is, whether there's names out there like Pappy Van Winkle, or Blanton's or whatever it may be. So I could have those bottles. And whether or not the money is kind of off to the side. If I want to spend $10,000 more to go buy another one, I could still go buy another one. But when it comes to a single barrel purchase, there's been ones that I've had that are amazing single barrels, and I'll never have that one again. I may have another one that's amazing, but I'll never have that one again. So I know that's not the answer people look for, but to me, that's more rare of a bottle than any other bottle that I could have.
Right.
So, so I do, enjoy picking those out as well. And I think, you don't have to hunt those as much. So when people go to the liquor store and they're looking for, the liquor store up the street from here, I work with them quite a bit on different things. And, just like any liquor store, they hear that all day long, get calls all day long. Do you guys have Blanton's? Do you have Pappy Van Winkle? It's like, no, we don't. But to me, it's like you're walking past so many other ones that are really good. Just give them a shot first. And then, because what happens is those get marked up so high. If I've never spent $10,000 on a bottle, I hope my wife hears that part. I've never spent $10,000 on a bottle of whiskey, but
not on a single bottle,
right? Yeah, no, not a single. But how good would that whiskey have to taste to justify that purchase,
mm-hmm.
right? So, so I think when it starts getting marked up like that, just spend a lot less money and try other things and see what works best for you.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's true in so many areas. That sort of, it's more like about the status than it is about the actual product itself. It's more like because you're ordering that in front of your client at a restaurant, they assume success on you or something.
Sure.
It's a different thing. And I don't even know what that would be like because I've never had the budget to do something quite that ridiculous.
Right.
But now that you have the whole business set up around Ty the Bourbon Guy, you get to expense all this stuff? Is this just like this is a business expense?
It's still a hobby for me, still a passion, but I enjoy it. So there's been different companies that may want to work with me or do different things.
That's cool.
But it still gives me the freedom to, if I don't like your product or I don't enjoy that myself, I'm not going to put that out there because this isn't my full-time gig. And so some people I see, and I'm, that's what they do. I'm not judging it, but especially on Instagram, every post, right, is I use this, I use that, I use this.
Yeah.
And, they're getting paid for those sponsorships. But to me, I got into it because I just enjoyed bourbon, right?
Yeah.
So I enjoy bringing others along and educating others about it. So I'm not going to take some sponsorship just, because they're going to pay me, a little bit of money or something like that, or give me a free product.
Right. And as like you are a food critic in a way, not a food critic. I don't. Is there a word? Alcohol critic? Something.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much.
But you have to stay independent, and there's even probably certain laws for that too, where it's like I can't misrepresent. I mean, or even just sort of like some journalistic integrity on your part. That's like, I'm representing what I actually think here.
Yeah, there's actually been a few of my posts that I'm just, I've bought the bottle, I've paid for it myself, but I just enjoy that bottle so much that Instagram has flagged some of them and said,
really,
like, we think this is a sponsored, post, and I'm like, no, it's not sponsored. I just enjoy it. So
yeah,
I think it kind of, there's so much out there that people can enjoy if they just taste different things, and that's why I love when we have people over, and it's always kind of funny because people are being respectful, but they don't want to, I don't want to drink any of your good stuff, and it's like that's why I have as much as I do, is to share it. Yeah. So I have a bottle of Blanton's and some of these other rare bottles, and I pour that for people, and then they always and then I say, now try this, and the funny thing about it is people always say, well, honestly, I like this one more. And I'm like, that's my point. Yeah.
Right.
So,
and it's so subjective too.
Right. Absolutely.
But it's the same thing with like the diamond industry, the perfume industry, whatever, where like my favorite new ad right now is like, I think it's like a Cartier ad, and it's got Jay-Z and Beyonce, and she's like singing Moon River. Have you seen this ad?
Right. No.
This is the latest thing. And I'm just like, this is diamonds, guys. Like, and I watched that ad, and frankly to me, I'm like, do I really want to buy things from a place where I know that your markups are making you that kind of money, where you're hiring Beyonce and Jay-Z for your ad? Like, does that really mean it's worth it, or does that mean I'm getting screwed when I buy, that diamond or something? Like, it's a little odd. But again, I think that's where that transparency comes in as a business of just like, this is really what we do. And I think consumers like yourself we're going after the place that's just the most open.
Yeah.
This is how it works, and this is what we do, and this is why we care. And
yeah, and there's been which a lot of people think is cool. I think it's cool too, but distilleries will send me here's a bottle of, and what I've learned over the years of doing that is what are your expectations with that bottle? So before I ever accept anything, if you send me a bottle and you're curious what my thoughts are and you want me to be honest about it and share that honesty with my followers, then I'll do that. But if you send me a bottle and you want me to talk about how it's the best whiskey ever made, and I don't think that, then I won't accept that, right? So,
do you think that about any type of whiskey, that it is the best whiskey ever made, or the best whiskey for you ever made?
See, I get that question a lot. Like, what's your favorite whiskey? It's so hard because it's to me, there's so many other variables. So there's some whiskeys that I enjoy that they're up there in proof. I mean, they may be 130 proof or 120 proof, and if it's 100 degrees outside, I'm not reaching for that whiskey, right? So
it's more about the environment.
Right. It's like, what am I doing? What am I eating? Who am I around? So for me, there may be a rare bottle, or there may be a special bottle or my favorite bottle but if it's just me by myself, I won't drink it. So I always feel like these bottles are meant to be shared. There's a lot of hard work that goes into making bourbon, and they don't do it so that it can sit on a shelf and look pretty.
Right.
They do it so that people can enjoy it and share it with their loved ones. So, so to me, it's the situation. It's where I'm at, what I'm doing, pairing it with foods and things like that. What the event is. That matters more to me than the actual whiskey. And I have set ones that I kind of go to.
Yeah.
But it all depends on the situation.
Yeah.
So.
And the food's a major aspect of it too. For
Absolutely.
Sure. And I know that you do a little barbecue as well.
I do.
You're into fine
Ty
foods.
the barbecue guy.
Ty the barbecue guy? Is this the other brand that we got going?
Yeah. I was like, maybe I should just make a separate. No, I it actually started because, I enjoyed during the, when everything first started, and, my wife and I are at home, I grilled, but we weren't going out anywhere. And I kind of thought, man, this would be a great time to really start working on that and experimenting with food. And so I got my first smoker and, went from there and just started. Same thing. I just I have these passions, and I just dive into YouTube, and I'm just there all day long. And my wife's like, you're watching another video about ribs, or steak or bourbon or whatever. So, so I learned a lot about that. And then I realized that, hey, these two things kind of go together, barbecue and bourbon. And so I'm just going to take a chance. I think, there's a lot of people that, in my opinion, think so much about their content on Instagram. And in my opinion, people follow you, yes, because of the bourbon, but they're also curious about the person. Mm-hmm. So when I start sharing, like, hey, I did this, now I actually get questions about the barbecue stuff.
Yeah.
And so, it's just another passion. It shows them another thing that I'm into, and so that's been cool to share that as well. So.
Yeah. Well, it's good to not be just in one lane, I think, and because I don't think we're wired to be in one lane really.
Right. Yeah.
And people that kind of have to for their brand or whatever, it always feels odd to me.
Right.
It's like, man, because I don't know that I can relate to somebody who just does like one thing all day long.
Right.
Like I can't relate to that.
Right.
Because I don't. Also, I'm all over the place.
Right.
I love a lot of different things. And this podcast is one of the ways that I get to go and do that and show that. And yeah, but that's good, man. You shouldn't put yourself in a box and just focus on the one thing. This was absolutely delicious.
Yeah.
I already feel tipsy as hell because it's like 1:00, man. I just had breakfast a little while ago. I'm feeling
it's Friday, right?
I'm feeling good. It's gonna be a loose episode if I'm being honest. And I actually was thinking, I don't know the last time I really like drank on a podcast or like did a cigar on a podcast or something. So this is gonna be fun for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keep my thoughts together. Try to keep us moving without completely devolving.
We'll just keep pouring it up.
Just keep pouring it. Yeah, that'll be so. So before we get into another one here, what I'm curious about is when you review, what are how are the ways that you approach it? Is it more like you said about like this would pair with this kind of evening, this kind of food, or is it far more about real deep intricacies of the flavor?
I really try to go with the flavor first, and then from there I can figure out maybe what pairs well with it, right? So for me, it is more of the first thing I do is they call it nosing a glass, right? So you pour it in and you're just holding the glass up to your nose to see. And the first thing a lot of people, especially when they're first starting out, is ethanol, right? So it smells like alcohol.
Sure.
It smells like bourbon. But when you start to pull that back a little bit, and then you're, kind of, it just, I don't know, the way it hits your nose and your senses, what I do that helps me, and I still do it, I did it when I first started out, is I may start here and then I'll ease it off, but I'll close my eyes and it's kind of a weird, I think because I've done it so much now, I've gotten used to it. But when I first started, it was kind of a weird thing because I'd close my eyes and I'm basically asking myself, what do you smell? So when I do that, I may smell leather, tobacco, I may smell caramel, vanilla, oak, and so whatever it is that I'm smelling, I try to go a little bit further into it. So it smells sweeter, but does it smell, like candy sweet, or does it smell like honey sweet or fruit sweet? Like what type of sweetness? And so I kind of just deep dive into those different sections, and then from there I taste, and then I go back and smell again because now that I've tasted it, right? So I may pick up a whole different scent on that. So and some different notes. So I typically do that, and then I figure out, okay, what direction is this going? Is it spicier? Is it black pepper? Is it cinnamon? Or is it, a little bit more approachable, a little less spicier? Is the proof too hot? Is it, so I'm thinking in all different directions when it comes to that stuff. So there's some that are, I actually just did one the other day that was, it was 90 proof, which is a lower proof bourbon. The lowest it can be is 80. So you're on the lower end. But when I drank it, if I did it blind, I don't know that I would have thought it was 90 because it was so spicy that it felt like it was, it warms you up a little bit more.
Right, it was hitting a little harder.
Right, yeah.
Sure.
So now I'm thinking maybe we're more in the 100 range, but there's other ones that I've had that are, 105, 110, 107, whatever it may be. But I feel like maybe this is less than 100 because so there's a lot of pieces that go into it, but that's what I look for initially when I do a review. And like you said, it's so subjective. I actually have bottles that I've said like, man, I've rated it really low. And it's funny because there's one bottle in particular that the whiskey community loves. And it's just funny to me because, it's like, I that's just not one of my favorites at all.
What is it?
Right?
What's out it? What is it?
And so, yeah, well, it's the one it is actually called Old Tub, and it's made by Jim Beam. And it was a distillery exclusive at one point, and then during the pandemic and everything, they released it into distribution. So people love that whiskey. So to me, the human psychology part comes into it, right? So do you love it because it was exclusive?
Sure.
Do you love it because now you can get your hands on it, and it's easy, to find? It's $20, So But there's also, food wise, you and I could sit here and talk about food, and there's going to be things you like that I don't, and vice versa, right? So bourbon's the same way.
Yeah.
So just because, and I always tell people, when you're looking at reviews, maybe look at the one that you're looking at. Like if I'm going to go buy this bottle and I'm curious what your thoughts are on it, but then also look at other reviews that you've done and see, well, he likes all these other ones that I like.
Right.
And he doesn't like this one. So maybe our palates kind of align. But if you're rating low on all these ones that I enjoy, then maybe our palates don't align.
Right.
So
it's about finding someone who your tastes sort of mesh with.
Sure.
And that's who you need to be following. And that's the person who's going to guide you right.
Right. Absolutely.
That's cool.
And also I think it's a matter of listening. That the person that's doing the review. So yes, I do a review and I tell people what I think, but when people ask me, instead of me just telling them what they should like, I ask them, what do you like currently? So even for this podcast, you told me that you enjoy some Irish whiskeys and things like that. So I kind of know a direction to go now versus me getting some, and Irish, whiskeys they're going to taste different than bourbon, right? Just because of the way they're produced. But I know a direction now to go versus what I may want to take it in, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, it's actually making me feel really bad because I used to have some self-respect, and I would actually bother to buy like a bottle of Jameson or something, and now I'm just like, what's that bottom shelf Canadian blend there?
Is that one on sale for $10?
Yeah, no, I do feel bad about it, but I just had to make it cheaper on myself.
Sure.
But
and that's the thing.
I won't anymore. I feel like this is a turning point for me, and I can't ignore it anymore to buy good stuff.
But that's the thing though about whiskey in general is the price is not necessarily based on quality when it comes to whiskey. A lot of it is how much is produced. So, Heaven Hill makes this Elijah Craig. They make tons of it, right? So they can afford to sell that bottle for, $25, $30, somewhere in that range. And they actually have a few other ones that maybe sell for under $20 that are also really, really good. But a local distiller, they can't afford to do that. So their bottles may be $40, $50. It doesn't mean that that's good and this one's not or anything like that. It's just in terms of availability and what they're able to do. So there's times where even if I enjoy a local or a craft, bourbon, even just a little bit, I'll still support them, and I know, okay, I'm going to spend a lot more money on that. But to me, if you enjoy that brand, there's only one way they're going to stick around, and that's if you support them, right?
Yeah, you're encouraging their future, and not just that, but everybody gets better. It's like absolutely. My company is not the same company it was 5 years ago, and neither will that distillery.
Yep.
So,
and especially when it comes to whiskey, because they might have, maybe I try them for the first time, and their product is a 4-year-old product or a 3-year-old product.
Exactly.
And then, that's like, oh, well, I didn't like that one. Well, now maybe they're selling an 8-year product, and whiskey itself is, as it matures, that's bringing a whole set of different flavors to it. So you just gotta. That's why I just keep saying, just try different things, and it's okay to not like something, or, but there's in any price range in bourbon, I feel like there's quality across the board. You just have to know kind of which directions to go.
Yeah.
But,
well, send us in another direction here. What are you thinking now?
Yeah.
That was delicious.
Yeah. So
that was really good.
So we'll go in a little bit of a different direction. So the next bottle I have is Maker's Mark 46.
Okay.
And so, a lot of people are familiar with the Maker's Mark name. It's in a lot of bars. It's in a lot of, airports, and, people may have had it in college or whatever it may be. So Maker's Mark has I just call it the regular bourbon, right, that they make. And then from there they have, in my opinion, the next level up would be Maker's 46. And they're basically taking wood staves and finishing the bourbon is what it's called. So what they do is they basically take the staves and they'll maybe empty the barrel that has their regular Maker's Mark that you find in the stores. Take the staves and then put the whiskey back in and let those staves impact that whiskey. So
staves being the sides
of
the
wood
barrel.
Staves of the barrel. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So, and they do different things with those wooden staves to they experiment with it. So the way that I've always heard it explained, and I don't know that I've ever gotten it confirmed, but the company that provides those wooden staves and those barrels for Maker's Mark, they had partnered together, and from what I heard, that 46 just happened. They had tried this that many times to figure out what would work the best. And
cool.
So I don't know how true that is. Whiskey, there's a lot of stories that people just enjoy to hang on to, right? But I think that kind of, you know, it just brings so much more flavor to it. And again, when people are familiar with the Maker's Mark brand, so when they tell me, like, and I ask, you know, hey, what whiskey do you enjoy now? What bourbon do you enjoy now? And I hear, oh, I like Maker's Mark. The next thing I'll say is, have you tried Maker's 46?
Sure.
So that's the next one we have.
All right. Forgive us on the microphones here, people. I'll vamp a little bit.
Yeah.
If my mic doesn't fall down. I was hoping that wouldn't happen on camera there. Sorry, folks. Yeah, I don't. Man, my experience of bourbon is so limited, but I do enjoy Jack Daniels. Does that count as bourbon? Hang on. I just asked a big question. I assumed it did.
Well, let me pour this first, and then
okay. Well, the point I was going to make really was just the story I was going to tell was just my wedding ring here and the ring I bought for my wife. Here we go. Thank you. Her engagement ring and her wedding ring too are all made out of a Jack Daniels barrel, which I always thought was kind of cool. It's made by this dude out in California who just does, you know, custom rings. I actually bothered to put it on today. Which was fun. Not just wear my cheap silicone one. Like we all do.
Yeah, so Jack Daniels is...
Okay, all right. Wait. Let me try
okay,
this
yeah,
first.
then
We'll get into Jack Daniels.
We need
I have so many questions for you. This is going to be great. This is Maker's Mark 46. Yep. Yeah. I'm slurring already. Good God. Ooh, it's spicier.
Yeah?
Yeah. I'm getting more like cinnamon kind of tip of the tongue there.
Yep. So let me check the proof here. I can't remember. So the proof on this and the Elijah Craig are the exact same.
Oh, okay.
But that's where I was kind of telling you that sometimes when things are spicier, people think, oh, it's higher in proof.
Sure.
It's just how it drinks. It's how that bourbon is. So sometimes that proof is higher. Sometimes it's the exact same, but feels hotter.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that last one was like real vanilla-y to me, and this one is like pure cinnamon, and I'm almost getting like coffee now that I stopped drinking it. I feel like I have coffee breath right now, honestly. That is super interesting.
Yeah, so when people are telling me that they're trying to taste, you know, and they're like, you know, I drank it, but I just taste bourbon. One of the things I say is then pour another one. Try a different, and because that AB, you know, it's like
right. It's like the optometrist. It's just like you can't. I guess that looks okay.
Right.
But, it looks better with that one.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So it helps you have, you know, something to compare it to.
Sure.
Right. So, and Maker's Mark is actually a wheated bourbon, whereas Elijah Craig is not. So what that means is, typically in bourbon has to at least be 51% corn grain. And then a lot of bourbons have corn, rye, and barley, or, you know, malted barley in it. So Maker's Mark takes the rye out of it, and so then it's wheat is replaced, right? So so those are called wheated bourbons. So if you like Pappy Van Winkle is a wheated bourbon, Weller, and there's several others, right? But those are kind of the bigger names, and Maker's Mark obviously is one of them. So the tastes on these are going to be a lot different, should be a lot different than what you may taste on an Elijah Craig.
It doesn't taste like we're having the same drink, and except if you know that bourbon thing. That it's like all bourbons have that thing, and I can't put my finger on it.
That would probably come from the corn, right?
Yeah.
Because so if I poured you an Irish, you know, whiskey, this would taste different than that.
Oh, 100%.
Right? And it's because of that grain that they call it the mash bill, the recipe basically that goes into it. So when you go from different types and different percentages of that mash bill, then you're going to start tasting, it's going to impact that, right? So
okay.
But
yeah. Oh, that's interesting. That's really unique.
Yeah.
I like that a lot.
Yeah.
But it's also a little too intense for me. I feel like I couldn't have any food with this.
Right.
At all. It would wreck the food to me.
Yeah. And there's so many times where, you know, if we go out to dinner, especially when we're with friends, my wife kind of knows it, but if we're with friends and we go out to dinner, it's almost like, you know, we're sitting there and it's like, and these are friends of mine or people that know me, and they're like, what bourbon are you getting? What bourbon are you getting? And I'm looking at a list, and I'm like, well, I'll just do water. And so people are always like, you know,
Not much
and
of
then
a bourbon
and then
guy,
after,
is he?
yeah, exactly, this bourbon guy. But then after dinner, I may get this one, and it's because if I'm looking at that list, I know this may pair well with this, but this may not. This list may not. So I don't want that to, I want that to be something I enjoy, but I'm not drinking it as a drink unless I, do it on the rocks or get a cocktail or something like that.
I feel like that works better for the budgetarily minded. Like I always drink while I'm cooking.
Sure.
Like I very rarely drink with dinner.
Right.
I'm just like, you know what? I'm gonna drink now.
Yeah.
It's gonna hit hard and fast, and then I'll,
Yeah.
be able to eat after that.
Right.
So hey, that kind of works. I get what you mean.
Yep.
So okay, so I don't want to skip this though because now my heart's a little broken about Jack Daniels.
Well, so
certainly whiskey.
So Jack Daniels is its own category.
Interesting.
It's Tennessee whiskey is the category that it goes.
Oh,
under.
okay. And I'm a little familiar with what that is. Just
Okay.
made in Tennessee.
Right.
Right.
Well, so I always explain it like this. Bourbon is really a legal term. So, bourbon is at least 51% corn. It has to be aged in a new oak barrel.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these parameters on what makes that bourbon. But if somebody makes that in Japan, they cannot call it bourbon because it's a
Right.
product of the U.S.
Right.
So that makes that a legal term. Jack Daniels, if they chose to do that, could by law they follow every requirement in order to be considered a bourbon. But they have not gone that route, and they've actually now are considered a Tennessee whiskey. And there is a process, or I guess during the process, they add in a part where it's charcoal finishing, or filtering, I should say, charcoal filtering, to where they're running that whiskey through a filter, basically, of charcoal.
Okay.
So it is literally what it sounds like.
Yeah.
And so that makes Tennessee whiskey. So now Tennessee whiskey has its own legal definition.
Interesting.
So now if I make whiskey in Tennessee, now I have to also do the charcoal filtering, right? So
Did I make a fool out of myself thinking it was bourbon?
No, that happens.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, that happens. That's one of those questions that come up all the time, and it's people in the bourbon, and that's why I say on Reddit and some, somebody's right. It's like that happens all the time, but technically it's the same thing. I don't know if you've ever seen it. If anybody's gone to a liquor store and they see American single malt is what it might say on the label, that Scotch is a single malt whiskey, but we can't call it Scotch because it didn't meet the criteria to be Scotch, if that makes sense, because it was made in America. So
Okay.
we go against that.
Scotch must be made in Scotland.
Right.
In the same way that bourbon must be made in the United States.
Exactly.
Okay.
So Scotch is a product of Scotland. Irish whiskey is a product of Ireland. Canadian, Japanese whiskey. So there's all these different regulations and different restrictions. And so we can't call it Scotch if we make it in the U.S. We have to call it an American single malt or whatever it may be. So, and that's because of the legal definitions behind it.
Okay.
But what you're drinking is the same product. It's made similarly,
Right.
but it's not Scotch. So it's very similar. Jack Daniels is a bourbon, and they could be called a bourbon because they do produce it in the U.S., but they choose not to.
Maybe they're
So-
leaning into that because
Yeah,
maybe
it's funny
more of a
'cause-
crowded space. And
Yeah, I heard this one time on an interview with them, and they pretty much, it's like, does it really matter? Because at the end of the day, everybody's still asking that question, and they're still
Right.
mentioning the brand Jack Daniels.
Right.
So as a business, it's like, yeah, let's keep it out there now. I
Yeah.
don't know what the thinking is behind it, but now that they've become their own category, I look at it like they do what they do, and that's just kind of they feel like they don't need to define it in a certain category, and then they go with the Tennessee whiskey, and now there's plenty of other Tennessee whiskeys out there too. So
Do you like to drink other kinds of whiskey, or do you
Absolutely.
exclusively? You do.
yeah, there's so I actually enjoy Jack Daniels. I did this event a few years ago, and there was a Jack Daniels rep there, and there was all these distilleries, and I got a chance to try all these different ones, and whiskey, all different types of whiskey, Scotch, Japanese whiskey, everything. And I get to the Jack Daniels guy, and I'm talking with him, and I said, because again, I'm thinking college days, right? So I said, yeah, I don't know if I'm really that big of a Jack fan, and so he pointed me in the direction of some of their other whiskeys that they make. And he said, try the Jack Daniel's single barrel, try the Jack Daniel's single barrel barrel proof, try the Heritage whiskey, try the single barrel rye whiskey. So literally every one that I tasted that day, I was like, man, this is amazing. And so that's, and I kind of, when people are getting into whiskey, and whether it's bourbon or any other type of whiskey, again, if I had, and we talked about this earlier, where you may revisit a brand, or it's like if I had that in my head and I just didn't try any of their products because I don't like Jack Daniel's, I would have missed out on a lot of other good whiskey.
Right.
So I got a chance to try all these other ones, and now I own every single one.
Yeah.
So so that's where it's just kind of, you go back to it. And then it was funny because now that I've tried these single barrel products or whatever, and when I go back to the original Jack Daniel's, I can almost pick out now because I've had more experience with their brand, and their whiskeys. So that's a long answer, but so by law, no, they're not a bourbon, but by what they produce, they could be considered a bourbon.
That's interesting.
So
yeah, it's a little overwhelming. It must be overwhelming, right, to keep all of these straight, and it's a massive world, and it's like we have Jack Daniel's, and then we've got at least 6 variations on that, and so is every brand. You're going to have all of their variations. So do you ever feel overwhelmed by just how much there is, or do you just have the patient approach, take your time with it?
Right. Yeah. I mean, the patient approach, and I just always say I don't know everything. I don't distill whiskey myself, and
well, that's what I was going to ask too. If it's something you're going to get into at some point, are you allowed to? First of all, can you have a still? And
there's a lot of
you probably have to meet some
a lot of regulations.
How can you make
stuff behind it?
Beer at home, but you can't make whiskey?
Well, from my knowledge of that would just be the regulations in terms of like the categories. So, I've lived in certain states where you could sell beer and wine in grocery stores, but not liquor, right?
Oh man.
So there's
Oh, I'm super familiar with all of that. Like
right.
Utah is my least favorite state for that reason alone, because I got to go to like the communist liquor store. It just feels like I'm here with state-run employees.
Right.
Very, very odd.
Yeah.
Apparently, it's not that. Someone told me that even out in Utah, it is privately owned businesses. It's just they're not allowed to have a brand at all. There's no brand to their liquor store, and it makes me feel like soulless when I go there.
Yeah.
And the hours are super limited.
Well, that's where because I grew up in Virginia. Virginia is a controlled state, is what it's called. Meaning that they have their own liquor stores throughout. They're called ABC stores, so they're throughout the state.
Mm-hmm.
So they're controlled by the state. So when I go there, in my opinion, because I've seen it done all different types of ways, the relationship that I can build there is a lot harder than it is here. And here in Indianapolis, there is, Indiana as a whole, you can pretty much do whatever, right? So there's a liquor store up the street from here, and that's the liquor store that I go to almost all the time here, because I built a relationship with these guys. I could tell that they know what they're doing. They're the ones that are actually picking some of these, whether it's picking it to have as the inventory on the shelves, or picking a specific barrel. They understand whiskey. They understand their products, not just whiskey, but wine and everything else, right? So I can now have a relationship with them. Whereas if it was a state-run, place, it's just, somebody
odd,
working
right?
there, right? Yeah, it's just a little different.
Yeah.
There's not that where we have to, succeed, or, and by me buying, if the liquor store near me, if they're making a barrel pick and they get those 200 something bottles out of that barrel, and now they're trying to sell it, I'm going to support them and just say, yeah, I'll buy a bottle of that, and just to keep them, just keep supporting them. But when I go to a state run, that they've done this for the whole state, it just doesn't feel the same.
Yeah, it's not. It's
Right.
I will try not to turn this into a full-blown diatribe about capitalism, but no, it's not, because there's not nearly as much of an incentive for them to want you to be their customer. It's am I the closest one to you is really the only question that they've got to answer, as opposed to am I building something here,
Right.
where you as a free consumer get to go and choose where you want to go and who you want to work with and who you want to buy from, and we're going to compete to have the best stuff here as opposed to this guys down the street. Yeah, I think it's super odd. I'm definitely not about it.
Yeah.
And but that's true when it comes to pretty much anything. I
Sure.
think competition is very good,
Right.
because it means you actually get what you want.
Right. Well, and it's just a matter of, and again, I understand that I'm probably not the norm, right? So when I walk into, a chain liquor store and somebody that's just working there and they're told to push this bourbon.
Right.
Right. So whatever it is they may be telling me about this bourbon, it may be true. It may not be true.
Right.
But I know the difference there, right? Where somebody else may not. So to me, same type of thing. And I think that's the same with anything, right? It's the same with food. If there's some chain burger place, but there's a local place, it's like I feel better about supporting this local place in my own neighborhood, right? So
yeah,
very similar.
Yeah. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Wait, I'd ask you something else. Okay, so is making any of your own whiskey ever in your future? Is that
So not making whiskey, but one of the things that same liquor store, and this is where I think it's so important. If somebody's just getting into whiskey, if you have the ability to find that local store and just build a relationship with them, I think that's so important. Build a relationship with that store, and I actually have one of their barrel picks here. Just because it's so important, because just calling them every day, asking them if they have this rare bourbon, right? I mean, that gets old pretty quick, and they hear that 1,000 times a day.
right?
But if you go in there and you actually support them and you talk with them and just there's a lot of things that can come out of that, a lot of positive things. And one of the things for me is they have, we've kind of been talking sometime soon here about when they go to a distillery and pick that barrel, me going with them. So because what they're doing when you do that, you go to a distillery, and it just depends on the distillery, but that distillery may pull 6 barrels out of the warehouse. The warehouse, like they don't have tons of warehouses, but they may pull out, whatever, maybe 4 or 5, 6 barrels and let you try, and then you're picking one of these, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so to sell in your store with your label on it, their label, but you're, saying that you were the one that picked it.
Right.
So when you're doing that, if somebody's picking that for the whole state, like we talked about with Virginia,
right,
they're picking it for the whole state, right? So does that person really know whiskey? Maybe, but does their palate align with mine? Or, there's all these questions that I always have. But with this particular store, when I've tried their other picks, I enjoy every single one of them for the most part. So that tells me that when these guys are picking, they're thinking the way that I would think.
right.
And not always. There's a few that they've liked that I haven't, and vice versa. But so that's probably next for me, is going with them to a distillery and actually picking out, and making notes on which ones I think is the best one.
There's so much here that I never would have thought about, but you're right. There's got to be nuance in picking something for even your local area. Like, you live here, so you actually know a lot of the invisible things that someone who doesn't live here wouldn't know about this area. You even when it comes down to, like, I know which local restaurants do well here.
Right.
Like, what kind of food people around here like and will eat and will patronize, as opposed to the ones that try and close down. And
Right.
so you even have like a concept of the palate of this very small community.
Yep.
That's super unique, and it's not true in every place.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's also smart. Of course, I think this because they're asking me, right? But I think it's smart on their part to understand that, hey, we've got this guy who comes in here all the time. He's got a social media presence. He would understand what people are looking for. Let's just get his opinion.
Sure.
Because there's also been, on the flip side of that, some major chains that I've talked to that, he doesn't know anything about whiskey. We've got it. But to me, you're listening. If I'm representing your consumer, it's just like anything, right? I mean, if I open up a restaurant and I sell burgers, and you love burgers, and you're always at my restaurant, hey, we got this new one. Do you enjoy that burger or not? So to me, that's just business. I think that's just good business. Just building those relationships, not only from the consumer side, but also from the business itself. Just listening to what your consumer enjoys or doesn't enjoy.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Again, really great capitalistic things.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
We want to be part of this community, so
Yep.
we'll work with people in the community. That's awesome, man. My tolerance is complete shit right now. I haven't been drinking like at all. Andrea had a cold last week, and whenever someone around me gets sick, I become like a complete teetotaler, and I'm like, I'm gonna sleep really good.
Right.
I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna get some sunshine. I'm gonna work out. I'm gonna like do really good. So I have absolutely no tolerance. But
It's
you
all good.
must have like a solid tolerance at this point. It would
Well,
be my guess.
It's funny because I feel like I do. I feel like I always pretty much have, but it's so for me, when people come over to our house, that's where I enjoy, or even if we're going to somebody else's house, I'll bring certain bottles. That is what I enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's funny because just because I have as many bottles as I do, or I post on Instagram every day, or it's like sometimes I've literally had people ask me like, how do you drink every day? And it's like, I don't drink every day.
Right.
I just am posting, so, or if I do, maybe I'm, like pouring the little bit that I am and then I move on. Right. So if I'm doing that a couple times a week or something like that, and I think you kind of have to have the awareness about yourself too, and still do it responsibly and understand, what works for you. And, but when, we weren't having as many people over. And so that's actually what that's what created the idea of the live stream that I did,
mm-hmm.
because I missed that.
Yeah.
I missed just enjoy. And so social media for me, it's like, these are people that I can drink with, even, so I'm on a stream and I have something I'm pouring, and,
right.
And so I feel like I'm still having that communication and so that interaction.
Do you take time off ever? Do you do a sober October every now and then or anything like
yeah,
that?
I try to do pretty much like once a quarter. And
yeah.
I'm actually, I say in real life, I'm an accountant. So quarters I'm always paying attention to in general, right? So I always just kind of get it to align with that. But I personally, I think it goes back to knowing yourself. And I know that I'm not really consuming enough to really be concerned or anything like that. But when it comes to like my followers and viewers on, whether it's YouTube or Instagram, other people might. And so to take that time off and let them know it's okay. So we haven't done it yet, but one of the things on the live stream that I'm going to do, every week I'm talking about a different bourbon. But when we get to that week, I've actually got like different, whether it's a juice or whatever, different things lined up, right? And we'll just talk about that, for that week, right? So just to in my opinion, you kind of got to let, I hate the word influencer, but when you
There's no other word for it. It's okay. I know what you mean.
I don't feel like that, but but you are influencing people.
Yeah.
And if I'm posting every day, and like I said, people that know me think that I'm drinking every day. So what about the people that don't know me? And so I don't want to ever, I want to be the transparency again, right? Of no, it's okay to, let's take a week off as a bourbon family, as a bourbon community. Let's just take a week off and drink, try this juice or try that or whatever. But
it's a tricky thing because if you're not doing the math on it, all these things can totally just catch up on you. And it's something my dad always warned me ever since I started drinking, which was too young. I went to college really young, and so he was like, all right, do what you need to do.
Right.
But he was like, listen, we have some history of alcoholism in the family, and so you're going to need to watch out and take care of yourself.
Sure,
and it's something I always took pretty seriously. It was like, am I needing that drink every day after work?
Right.
Kind of. Am I ever binging or doing anything weird? Am I drinking alone? And is this getting kind of... But you have to watch those markers. But it is strange because we also don't apply that same logic to all sorts of other chemicals that are just as addictive and maybe more so for us. That it does kind of weird me out because the more I learn about things like even as simple as sugar, it's like, could any of us really take a couple days off of that?
Right.
It may not make you intoxicated. It may not give you cirrhosis per se, but it's going to do some other things too.
Sure.
And
my wife loves coffee. So when she got pregnant and she was limited on coffee, she was like, I don't know how I'm going to do it,
Right.
So, coffee, sugar, any of these things. I mean, there's things that we just kind of out of habit, right? And the same way I wake up every morning and pour a cup of coffee, like you said, I may come home every day and pour a glass, right? So if somebody's watching, whether it's one of my shows on YouTube or my content on Instagram, it's less about me personally feeling like I need that and more about me wanting other people to understand that that's okay if you need to take that break.
Yeah, but I think you already are on the right train because it's not about a drinking lifestyle for you. It's far more about the intricacies of tasting.
Right.
And it's like and it's one of the pure pleasures of life is food and drink. It's as restrictive as I can be with all the things we eat. Like I'm going to be in Champagne in a minute here. I'm going to Filippo's Pizza, and I will go there like a lot of times.
Right.
Even though I have so many rules about eating, right? But it's like, you know what? I'm absolutely here once.
Right. Absolutely.
That's not my lifestyle, but it's something I will 100% do.
Yeah. Anything in moderation, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And but moderation looks different for different people
Sure,
too.
absolutely.
Like, that's okay.
Yep.
Okay, I have more on this, but
Yeah.
we're both empty. So
We're good.
What have we got next?
So next,
I should check my time and make sure Andrew's not coming back too early.
Sure. So we can either try. So if you like that, we can stay on the weeded bourbon route, and with Larceny. So that's a barrel pick that the store up the street from me did recently.
Okay.
We can try that if you enjoyed Makers. If you want to go in a different direction, we can go. I have a bottle of it's called Remus Repeal Reserve. So I'll try to make this short. But Indiana produces a lot of whiskey. There's one distiller. It's called MGP. And really their business was to produce whiskey and just make it, barrel it, and let it age, right? And so if I'm starting a whiskey or a bourbon company, because bourbon takes time to age, I can't just open the doors, right?
Interesting.
So hey, but I can call this company and say, hey, I want however many barrels of this. They give it to me. I bottle, I may bottle it or whatever the case is, slap my label on it. Here you go, right? So I didn't actually distill that, but I'm using their stuff. So what I talked about earlier, that transparency and there's some labels that won't let you know that, right?
Right.
And maybe they will, but they make it very difficult to figure out.
Mm-hmm.
So it may say bottled in West Virginia, but then if you look at it underneath, it may say distilled in Indiana, distilled in Tennessee or whatever. So, but with the age of Reddit and Instagram and Twitter and everything else, people understand where that's coming from.
You can't hide for long anymore,
right?
Which
Exactly.
is good.
Yeah. And so people are buying certain brands, not because it's your brand, but because, you have MGP's whiskey from Indiana. So it's only a matter of time before they figured that out. And then they said, well, why don't we just bottle our own stuff, right? So they have a George Remus line, and so that's what this actually is.
Well, let's go local. That sounds fun.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we'll do the Larceny then.
Which one is this?
That's the one closest to you.
This to me?
Yep. So Larceny is another Heaven Hill product. So
Kentucky Straight.
that's probably a good transition anyway, because Elijah Craig is a Heaven Hill, Makers is a weeded bourbon.
I'm far too clumsy to be allowed to do this, but we're just going to do it anyway.
This
I got to apologize to my people for this microphone, too. I have to keep touching it and
Yeah.
messing with it because I broke it. I got to fix its stand.
And so, you can go to a store and pick up Larceny on its own, but this particular one is a barrel pick is what it's called.
Get this over to you. I'm so sorry about the mic, people. I got to stop touching it. It keeps trying to fall down, which is not helpful. Okay. So this is the... Did we do the one with the label or no? We did the one that is from Indiana but labeled differently, or no?
No, we
did not do that.
We did not do
This
that.
is Larceny. Okay.
This is Larceny. So this is a Heaven Hill product.
Okay.
So same family as Elijah Craig, which is
Okay.
the first one we tried, right?
Yeah.
But it is a wheated bourbon, meaning that they use the wheat instead of the rye, right? So that's similar to Maker's Mark.
Okay. Gotcha.
So-
It smells more like all that vanilla. Back to that. Reminds me more of the Elijah Craig from the smell, at least.
Right.
I'm going to sound like a complete idiot on this.
Well, no, I mean, that makes sense
podcast.
because, like I said, same family, right? It's coming from the same place.
Okay.
So, and this one is, like I said, considered a barrel pick. So that means that the store that I, am always communicating with and working with, they picked this particular bottle.
Yeah.
So if you go to a liquor store now and you say, hey, I remember, I was with Ty and we drank Larceny, you may buy that bottle and it may be a different experience
That's interesting.
than what this may be.
Not that I could necessarily tell the difference, though.
Right. You
like
might.
you could.
You might.
Yeah. I like it. I'm going to like all of these. But I got to say it's my least favorite so far.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's it's almost got like kind of a meaty thing going on within it, which I would think would be perfect.
It's almost
for
like a
me,
little
but-
salt, like
yeah,
saltiness. Like
yeah.
Yep.
This is gonna sound weird, but I'm tasting like salami when I'm
Right.
tasting this. I don't know
Yeah.
why.
Well, and that's the
Kinda
funny thing
neat.
too is like when you're tasting bourbon, the order in which you taste, right? Because what we just tasted now is triggering our palate for something else,
Right.
and so this may be one experience. So maybe we're getting that salty note because of what we just had,
That's true.
or maybe if we revisit this on its own, are we going to get the same taste, right? So it all depends. So
I'd still like it.
yeah,
Don't get me wrong. Larceny, don't come at me. But yeah, it's different. Yeah, and you're right. Second try is even a little different.
Well, and then even like, it's probably not the easiest now because we've had 3 different bourbons in here, but even just smelling the glass after the fact, you can probably pick up a lot of the basic notes. So it's a little like vanilla, caramel.
Tastes spicier to me than it smells too.
Right. Yep, I agree. So
I love this podcast. I love that I get to know nothing, but I still get to have a conversation with someone who does know something.
Sure.
And it's like what I'm saying actually matters, which is hilarious, right, in this conversation.
Yeah.
As if my opinion means anything here. But no, I mean,
absolutely. You're the one drinking it. So
yeah.
That's well, and then also what I always find interesting with bourbon compared to the other types of whiskey is with bourbon, there's so many people in the bourbon community that feel like, it's like, well, don't add water, just, I want my stuff.
I was going to ask you about this.
Barrel proof.
Yeah.
130 proof. And I want to taste it the way that it comes out of the barrel. So when something is, let's say not it's any of these really, 94 proof, 90 proof, 80 proof, they're taking what came out of that barrel and they're basically watering it down. 1, that makes more bottles. 2, that makes something more approachable because it's not burning, your mouth every time you take a sip.
But you're going to have to, the type of water you use also has to be important. I mean, as a former Coloradoan, I know that the big deal is, hey, we've got the Rocky Mountain water, and so that's what makes the beer taste so good. So that's got to be a part of the conversation too, right? Is where they source the water from.
Well, and Kentucky has limestone, water, and so that limestone helps with their water source, and so that's why they will claim that they have the best bourbon.
That's interesting.
So there's all these different things, but to me, like with Scotch, I'm not Ty the Scotch guy, but I still enjoy Scotch, right? So I'm not as knowledgeable in Scotch as I may be on bourbon, but from what I know of it and the people that are knowledgeable have told me is add water. And they may be adding, like maybe that Scotch is already 80 proof or a lower proof, and they're telling me to add water to that. Bourbon, typically they'll say if it's 130 or 120 or anything over 100, add water to kind of, open that up a little bit. So I've always found that interesting that with Scotch, they want you to add water because the idea is on certain whiskeys, if you add a drop or 2 of water, it'll open up some of these flavors. It'll almost like unlock these other flavors that you weren't getting before. So it's like a different way of thinking. But for me, I've tried this, and with bourbon, there have been ones that I just drop 1 or 2 drops of water in, and it may change that altogether. And then there's others that I've done that with, and it's like it dulls it down. It's like it took everything that was fun out of it. and so I know now that I prefer that particular one without water or with water. When I first started doing my reviews, it just was way too much. It was too time consuming. But when I first started doing my reviews, I actually did it. Here's what it tastes neat without anything in it. Here's what I think with ice or with a block of ice or a couple drops of water. And to make a lot of people frustrated in the bourbon community, I would add Coke to every single bourbon that I review. And because my way of thinking is a lot of people, if they're looking at my review and they're saying, well, he's saying that this is a 5-star bourbon, right? And the way that you enjoy it is just throwing Sprite or Coke in it, then, is it worth spending that money on that, right? So all these reviews, they're typically reviewing without anything in it. Mm-hmm. So for me to look at that, but that's not how I enjoy it, then I kind of look at it like, well, then what's the point of that?
Right.
So
people really do that? People really buy top shelf bourbon and put a Coke in it?
Yeah, people do that.
Strange.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it's a lot of it is because, hey, I know that name. And we talked about that earlier, right? Like the prestige of this bourbon.
Right.
But I enjoy it with Coke, right?
Right.
And so my thing is, people have always told me, like, well, I know that's not the right way to, and it's like, you bought it, right?
Yeah.
You do whatever you want with it.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's true.
But for me, if people are open to it, I will always tell them, hey, there's some really good ones that, there's bottles I have that are sub $20 that I can drink by itself. If people come over and want to mix it. If you want to drink it on ice, drink it on ice. There's some that you don't have to spend that, because Coke itself because when you're talking craft cocktails, it's a little different. You need something that's going to carry through, that you could still taste the whiskey, right? If that makes sense. But Coke is so overpowering that, you're not going to taste the reason why that was however expensive it was. Right?
Probably not.
But if, like I said, at the end of the day, if that's what somebody enjoys and that's what they do, then, who am I to?
You're going to meet them halfway.
Yeah, exactly.
Give them the full story.
Right. So.
Ooh, nice to be tipsy on a Friday.
Yeah, there you go.
TGIF feels good. I feel like everybody has their own sort of drug. I feel like I've talked about this on the show before. Just like, this is the drug that makes them feel right. And some people, it's certainly coffee, and some people, it's definitely alcohol and nicotine and whatever. I enjoy nicotine every now and then. Do you feel like for you, like liquor is the drug? That's the one where it's like, and I'm not talking about, talking about alcoholism or anything dark like that, but it's like, you know what? You have a little bit of bourbon with some friends and you're like, oh, this is me.
Right.
Is that the one for you?
So I think my wife and I talk about this often about, I call it being centered. So when, whether it's work or whether it's life, anything that may, if I'm stressed and I don't want to, because that gets kind of iffy too, comparing or talking about stress with alcohol, but just in general, if I'm trying to get out of work mode and just enjoy my life, right? And so I have, I do fantasy football. I barbecue. I do bourbon reviews. So to me, it's just one of the things. I think, regardless of the passion, it's just important to have a passion.
Yeah,
something outside of what you may do Monday through Friday.
Right.
Something that you enjoy. That's just you. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's the way I always say is like, what keeps me centered. And for me, doing my, every Tuesday, 8:00 Eastern, and that's not a plug, right? But, it's like, I know that I've got my live stream and so regardless of how that day went, to me, it's fun because I'm going to get on there and I have different guests on there, or different viewers may ask questions on there, or whatever it may be. So it's just a fun thing to do. To me, it's no different from, I look at it similarly to, hanging out with friends or just anything. But so it's definitely one of my things that I enjoy. Yeah. And so, but again, enjoy the tasting of it. And that didn't happen originally. And that's where I think the pretentiousness of it can kind of get away from people, because I used to play football and I used to lift weights and all that stuff. And when I first walked in that weight room, it was very intimidating. It's like, man, these guys are lifting how much? Yeah. But, they pulled me to the side and just said, hey, look, everybody starts somewhere, right? Start here. So that stayed in my head forever, right? So now with the bourbon, I think of it the same way of, yes, there's all these other ones that I enjoy and I can, nerd out with the best of them, right? But for somebody that's just getting into it and just starting, hey, everybody started somewhere. Everybody started by mixing it with something. Everybody started it with, with an ice cube, or, so meet them where they're at and then just kind of go from there.
Right. The end goal being to have a real palate for it and really to understand what's going to enhance your life and enhance that meal and enhance this experience with your friends.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I totally understand that.
Yeah.
I was feeling, and I feel the same way too. Like, I don't want to speak ill of anything. I hadn't been doing jujitsu for a minute. I love doing jujitsu, and I wasn't in a place where I was real happy with the opportunity to do it. And I went here in town, or in Lafayette. There's a place that I went to on Wednesday, and they were really great guys there, and it was a good environment. And I came home and talked to Andrea that day, and I was like, oh man, I'm just me again. Like you said, it's centered.
Yeah.
It's like I did a podcast today, and I went and did jujitsu, and that's me.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're just sort of back to yourself again.
Yep.
But it can be hard when it depends how much control you have over that thing. If you don't have the chance to do it all the time, and I think travel is one of the reasons I don't always have the chance to do my things. You sort of forget who you are in there. You're like, all right, I know I always feel best when I'm doing these things. But that was part of why I was so glad that we got to put together, to do this episode, because I've been stuck and looking for people and traveling way too quickly and to do
Right.
it. So I'm glad we get to just have bourbon. And we're family, man.
Right.
This is
Yeah, we're
crazy.
family. Yeah.
How nuts is that? All right, take me to another stop. Where else are we headed today?
Yeah. So I think,
On this too.
when in Rome, right? So,
Okay.
well, I talked about the George Remus. So he's actually a historical figure, very interesting guy. So obviously I wasn't around for it, but the stories is that he was, I don't know if it's like a, back in the day, like the gangster mobster type of guys, but he was always, in trouble with the law.
Okay.
But he was known for having these like huge parties and things like that, and he would give away like cars and stuff with it. And so the whole story of him is very interesting. So if anybody listening to it, this podcast, look him up. He's a very interesting guy. But anyway, so the actual person is not really the best person, but the brand that they MGP bottles under the Remus Repeal batch is pretty good. So that's the one that people would source from, different companies would source from and bottle it under their own labels.
Gotcha.
And then they decided to do their own. So we'll try that one next.
Okay. Which is this on my side here?
Yep. The one to the right of the makers. Yep.
This guy?
That one right there. Yep.
Okay. Remus Repeal Reserve. 100 proof.
Yeah.
All right. We're really getting going now.
So we're going up a little bit in proof. Same thing. I mean, I tell anybody, it's always easier to go up in proof than to start at something that's
That makes sense.
a little higher, right?
That's probably more
Yeah.
than enough. I feel so gentle here. I'm so nervous to drop anything.
No, there's plenty of backups around.
Fair enough. All right. But this is just your thing. I can tell you're sort of in your element, even just walking me through these.
Yeah, and
That's
this
what you like to do.
absolutely, and it's it's funny because when everything first started happening, people were talking about liquor stores running out of stuff, and I got a lot of texts back then. It's like, you'll be okay, like it's like.
Oh, you mean when the pandemic started?
Right, yeah, when everything happened and there was that liquor stores are going to run out of stuff. People were like, yeah, you'll be fine because you have plenty of stuff. But
house is a bit of a flammable danger, right?
Right, yeah. But for me, it was like I didn't really, and even with my content, I didn't really produce that much because the fun of it for me is not. I mean, yes, I enjoy whiskey, but the fun of it is sharing it with other people and talking about it with other people
Right.
and. So to me, that's I care more about that than I actually do the bourbon itself.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So
Okay, what should I be looking for in this one?
So this one is, it's 100 proof. So we'll see if this one's a little hotter.
Okay.
But it's going to have your typical caramel, vanilla. Most bourbons, if you say,
Ooh.
can you feel that one a little bit?
Yeah, I was not expecting that, frankly.
There's also some water here if you.
Oh no, I'm gonna power through this.
Yeah.
I can't be on camera being a complete pussy.
Yep. So the oak, there's probably a little bit more of that. So this is actually a blend. So they took. So for anybody watching or listening that's really into bourbon, this is the batch 3. And they blended this. So this is 12% of a bourbon from 2007, 78% of a bourbon from 2008, and 10% of a bourbon from 2008. So it's probably 2 different bourbons. So they took that mixture basically and blended that together.
This is the real deal.
This batch. Yeah.
I'm glad you warmed me up for that one.
Yeah.
This is something else.
So we're going up in proof, but we're also going up in age.
It does make it, much harder to taste some of that nuance though when I'm sort of, because there's more of a real reaction happening,
Right.
Than,
Sure.
than with the others.
Yeah.
Wouldn't call that smooth.
Well,
sure.
and that's where the water comes in my opinion, because if somebody's just starting out, so I never judge anything off the first sip, because
right, and that's true too, and that's what I'm doing also.
Yeah, it's like you're kind of going off of the um, you take a sip of any alcohol and it's like, it's alcohol.
Right.
So for me, the smell, like even if I smell it initially and then I take that sip, when I go back to the smell, it may enhance the smell.
Yeah, I can see what you mean.
Right. And so same with the taste. So the more that I'm going with that, but if I can get the water just to bring the alcohol down just a tiny bit, then because you don't want to like dump water in, right?
Yeah.
It also just tastes like watered down bourbon. But if it's a drop or two, that'll get some of the alcohol out and just make it smooth around the edges to make it a little easier to go about.
I was way more prepared that time.
So I don't know if you had any experience in college with wild turkey, but like for me, wild turkey 101, that was like a big thing.
Well, where did you go to college at?
I went to college in Virginia, Longwood University.
That makes more sense.
Yeah. And so wild turkey is one that in college got kind of, I don't want to say got ruined, but it just, it was one of those ones that we enjoyed a lot.
Yeah.
And so now I go back and I revisit that bottle itself, but then also that distillery. They make a lot of great products. And the family behind that is the Russell family. So Jimmy Russell, I actually can't remember his age off the top of my head, but he has been around for a very long time. And I actually heard him talk about proof of bourbon once, and he compared it to a steak. So he said the reason why people like higher proof bourbon is the same reason why somebody might like a rare steak or medium rare or something like that.
Interesting.
Because of the you do that maybe to get more flavor out of that steak or more tenderness or whatever it may be. Same with bourbon. So at a higher proof, it's less watered down, meaning if you can get through the alcohol side of it, then there's way more there to taste, right? So that was a way that he explained it that kind of stuck with me.
Right.
But
and everybody's got their own thing. Some people can't handle that rare steak.
Yeah.
I don't think I like a rare steak for sure. That's a little much.
Yeah.
But I'm into, so Andrew and I are really into like this whole carnivore diet thing. This is the new thing in my household.
Okay.
And I'm seeing people who go the step further. I will not do this, but who only eat raw meat all the time, which I think is super odd and would really take some getting used to. Just pure raw chicken.
Right.
No, I just don't think I can do that. Yeah.
I don't know.
Not about it, right? It's pretty good when it's cooked. But yeah,
Virginia is considered the South, so if it's not fried, then
yeah.
Right. Although moving out here, I've changed. I've improved that a little bit, but yeah,
that's good. That's good.
But
well, you're
growing up with Southern food. It's like
I think barbecue, has luckily made its way into the spotlight. Maybe replace some of that. We've got some southern, but also really high end kind of.
Yeah, well, really, kind of talking about the
gourmet
barbecue stuff. I mean, realizing for me, it was like I can get something just how I cook it, and I could just put salt and pepper on it, but just how I cook it can bring so much more flavor without adding some of these other things that are going to hurt me over time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, chicken wings. I love making chicken wings on the smoker. That's one of my favorite things to do. And I can, again, same thing. I have actually a certain mixture of spices, but it's mainly salt, pepper, some of your basic stuff, garlic. But then it's like a dried jalapeno in there. And so I put that on the chicken wings and I smoke that. And that's some of the best wings that I've made, in my opinion. And, but it's not fried or anything like that. Right. So the barbecue side to me, and there's actually, now I've even seen like with the keto, and I don't know that much about keto, but there's actually like keto barbecue books. And there's a lot of people that are interested in that diet just because it's like, oh, I can still eat barbecue.
I would assume barbecue was kind of already keto, wasn't it?
It was, meat. But some of the, mainly like the sauces and the sides and all that stuff, right? But
that goes.
But that's where it's like, and even for myself, it's like, oh man, I could do that. It's
right.
like I like barbecue anyway. Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I'm such a sellout at this point. Not really a sellout, but I had to change so many things recently in my kitchen because for years I've cooked basically everything that we eat. I cook every day, and I got to a place where the things I were making were quite fancy, and then I toned that down to be like, all right, what can we actually afford to cook all the time? Like, maybe I don't need all of these garnishes on this dish, and maybe we can take some things away. Right. And now it's gone another level further, which is that it's like, all right, maybe I won't use spices on this meat, which is the latest one, which turned out fine actually. And what I noticed was that the main reason for that was because of the quality of meat and the type of meat that we started buying. And so as you raise the quality of meat, it's like, oh, we just need to salt that. It's going to taste pretty good. As opposed to having to cover anything up with spices.
Right.
But
And there's so
I
much
do-
there's so much similarity too, just between, we're talking about barbecue, but I'm just bringing it back to bourbon. It's so similar. Like I've always heard that you can finish whiskey in a certain barrel, or you can age it, but if the product going in isn't quality, then that whiskey still may not be.
So does it trace all the way back to the corn and to the wheat
Oh
and
yeah,
to the rye?
They spend so much time trying to working with these farmers, and
Mm-hmm.
maybe they only work with certain farmers, and because that quality. I actually did I went and visited Four Roses Distillery in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, and not too long ago, and they were talking about how when the grain comes in, they actually analyze that to make sure that it's like, and that same thing, because it's so closely related to barbecue. People said the same thing to me, that if you start with a discounted meat that's just got, it's like you can put seasonings on it and do whatever, but it's only going to be but so good, right? If you start with a higher quality product, and then you add a little bit more to it, then it's going to be a better product.
The fun one with meat, I don't know how deep you want to go into this, is if you start buying the grounds that have the organ meat in them, so the ones we're doing now have liver and heart in them, and there's actually a ton more. Like, the first time you see a little getting used to, but then you start to recognize, like, this tastes more like beef than the beef I was eating before, because those organs are really doing something in that ground. That one's been really odd. But is there ever going to be a like an organic stamp on whiskey where it's this was the corn even was grown without pesticides, and like
it's funny you mentioned that, because there's a book called Bourbon Curious, and in that book there's a whole chapter on GMO versus non-GMO corn. And so obviously back in the day, this wasn't a thing that really mattered as much, and now people want to know that their corn is non-GMO and all these other things. And so same thing with just like any other business, that brand now has to keep up with that, and it's more important to a consumer, that's you're using non-GMO corn in your bourbon than so it's I was literally just looking at this the other day.
The industry is gonna it's gonna go along with whatever the consumer's saying too, and so
absolutely.
You can start marketing your organic whiskey. It's gonna that's gonna be a different thing, and who knows if that will take off.
Right.
It'll certainly happen.
It wouldn't surprise me if it's I think just because the restrictions on bourbon are a lot. In my opinion, bourbon's the most restricted out of all the whiskeys, and just based on the knowledge that I have, it's more restricted than Scotch or some of the others, and meaning that because it's a U.S. product, the government is basically it has to be this, it has to be that, it has to be this, right? So with bourbon, you can't add, here's your grains, you distill the alcohol. It's like you can't add anything. It's like Scotch, you can actually add coloring, food coloring, right, to change it. But with bourbon, you can't. So whatever color these are, that's just what color they are.
It's got to be some point of pride for bourbon too. Is like, this is like, you want that good dark color,
right?
In a way, because that's all completely legitimate.
It's all legitimate, and so a lot of times you can tell. It's not always the case, but if something is aged longer, that means it's sat in that charred barrel for a longer amount of time, right? So it's sitting in that barrel, splashing up against that barrel, right? So it's making that whiskey dark. Because actually, a lot of people don't realize, like moonshine, or it's not vodka, but it's pretty much moonshine when it goes into the barrel. So it's a clear spirit.
Yeah.
These all started out that way.
Makes sense.
But because they sat in the barrel that was charred, that was new, they have taken on that color.
Yeah.
Right. So with Scotch, they use used oak, or used barrels basically. I don't know if it necessarily has to be oak. I don't know about that, but they use used barrels, so that char isn't as
not nearly as present. It's
right.
lost
Exactly.
some of that dye.
So if you look at a Scotch, it may be a little lighter in color, and so just thinking about it logically, that's probably why they're okay with using other colorings to get it back, but with bourbon, it's like, this is grain. We made alcohol out of it. It sat in a barrel. There you go. So,
well, it does. I mean,
pretty much is organic, I guess, without being.
The color things
100%
100% affects how they taste, though.
Right.
I mean, like, I remember being an idiot in high school at one point and made salsa with a friend of mine for some school thing, that you do.
Yeah.
And we decided we were going to make ours purple colored, and for some reason that almost in itself made it just taste absolutely horrible. We're primed to see color in our food and to use that to help us identify what's going on, and it's the same thing where you've got with a blind taste test, sometimes just knowing. I think my favorite one, I'm all over the place, I'm sorry. My favorite one is there's this YouTube clip of this kid who is like, I know this is Pepsi, I love Pepsi, I hate Coke. And he takes the blindfold off and he's got a Coke right in front of him. And it's just our experience of what we think is going on with our eyes is informing so much of what we're tasting.
Absolutely. And so with bourbon, it's the same way, man. So it's like, there's so many times where, so again, these harder to find bottles. So one of them being Weller is a big brand that's distilled by Buffalo Trace, and it has become very difficult to find in a lot of areas. So Weller is a wheated bourbon. So when people tell me like I'm looking for Weller but I can't ever find it, I always suggest the Maker's 46, because I'm saying here's a product that's available everywhere. And I've even seen this in like some airport bars and stuff like that, right? So it's pretty much everywhere. And price wise, you're paying maybe up to $40 for that bottle. But you can find it, and it's, if you enjoy Weller, then you'll probably enjoy this, because this is also a wheated bourbon. And there's so many people that have told me like, I don't like Makers. And
well, you're primed, and
anybody that I've ever I've seen some on YouTube, and then there's also been people that I know that I've blind tasted. I've poured Weller in Makers. I don't know that Weller has ever won that blind taste, if it's two comparable products. And so it's like, because Weller is hard to find, and it's more expensive when I do find it, and it just makes it.
There's buy-in there though too. It's the same thing with anything, man. If you charge less for your services than all your other competitors by a massive amount, and someone is a client of yours, they will have a different expectation for what you're going to do. As opposed to if they're buying into something expensive, then they will be more primed to like it. It's tickets to a show or to a movie. Weirdly, you pay more, and you're like, well, I've bought into the sort of illusion that this is going to be better for that reason, to this brand, to whatever, to not buying the store brand. And all of a sudden, you're going to like it more for that reason. But at the same time, who's to say that that's illegitimate? Like, who's to say that bourbon is best enjoyed blindfolded? Because because technically you're right. That's the only way you can experience bourbon. It happens in your mouth and in your nose, you know? But isn't part of the experience the label that sits on your shelf that has the buffalo on it? And you're like, that's got a buffalo. That's what Joe Rogan drinks. There's like pieces of this that play in and tell the story that make you want to like things.
I think it's part of it, man. It's
we're rigged for bias.
There,
like we just
there's
are.
a bottle down there, New Riff, and I'm wearing the shirt too. And so New Riff, what they did was they said, hey, we're gonna start, we're gonna make our own bourbon, and we're gonna age it. But while it ages, we're gonna go under a different brand altogether, and we're gonna source. So they would get whiskey from somewhere else, get bourbon from somewhere else, But the thing that I thought they did that was so great was they used they didn't use their name at all. They used a whole different brand. And then that way, when their stuff was ready, they switched brands over. And because you're letting the consumer know, hey, this is completely two different things, right? And so I went to New Riff. We have some friends that actually could walk to the distillery where they lived. And they told me, they said, hey, they just built this distillery here. We need to check it out. So I went there before their product was ever even bottled. And I'm on the tour, I'm meeting some of the people there, I'm talking with them, and I'm like, man, this is so cool, and they're new, and I got a chance to try their products before they bottled. And I came back here, and some of the liquor stores in the area I talked to, and I said, hey, do you guys have New Riff? They just started bottling. And a lot of the managers at these liquor stores were like, who? I mean, they had no idea who it is, and now New Riff is one of the bigger names. They're considered craft, but they're probably on the top side of craft distilling. And so, but every time I drink New Riff, it's like, I think back to those experiences, right? And so I think that's part of it. The funny thing about that, and I did a Instagram live with one of the founders of New Riff, and I was telling him that, I always thought that. So what I wanted to do was, let's take the bias out, and I'll do it blind. And I put that against other bottles that, some of these other ones that are some of my go-tos and some of my favorites. And New Riff kept winning in the blinds.
Nice.
So it's funny because it's like, I I keep reaching for it because I think about, our friends live near there,
Yep.
and we hung out there, and I got a chance to talk with one of the founders.
You
and
have memories.
I have all these memories
Yeah.
behind it. But to me, that's part of anything. I mean, that's like,
it's one of the things that food and alcohol can do
Right.
is you can ascribe memories to it. Everybody's mom makes something that they love,
right,
and to someone else it's like, well, it's not very good, man.
Right,
But
right.
you love it. It's the best meal,
right,
and that's okay. That's because who's to say it's not part of the experience? It's almost like something you said at the very beginning, but really it's like the Socrates quote. If you want to get really weird with it, is it pious because God loves it, or does God love it because it's pious? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm thinking of just the Jay-Z song. No. Yeah. No, that's isn't that Jay-Z, Frank Ocean, and
I think so.
Kanye on that song?
I think so.
Why can I not think of the name of that fucking song?
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those, like, and there's so many times, like, when people are picking out notes, I've actually heard people say that, because to me it's less about,
No Church in the Wild. Church in the Wild. It's called Church in the Wild.
oh, there you go.
Sorry about that,
You're good.
folks. My brain paused. Yeah.
Yeah, I think about, like, so when I say, because I actually used to manage a coffee shop, and I didn't drink coffee before I managed that. And I'll just say a large coffee brand.
Chain of,
right?
yeah.
Chain of.
We could take our
thousands
guess
of them,
at about one of
Yeah, and so I
three.
used to manage one, and they have such a way of, like, because I didn't drink coffee, and they were like, we don't care. And so it's like they have, like, this whole way of getting me there. And I there's so many similarities between coffee and bourbon, in my opinion, or whiskey. And they said, hey, you don't drink coffee, start with a white chocolate mocha. And so I take a sip, and I'm like, oh yeah, I like this. This is nice and sweet and everything else. And then, okay, now try this. Now try that. Now try, and it eventually got me to the point that I was drinking their coffee black,
Right.
and with nothing in it. And so so whiskey to me is the same thing, right? So it's like, okay, try it with Coke or Sprite. Try it with ice. Try it with a little bit of water. Now try it neat. So it's the same concept, but in those flavors, like, even went back then when they gave me this book on all these different notes and stuff, and I used to laugh because the coffees, they would come out with all these ones, and oak was in all of them. It was always a description on every coffee that they sold. And so I always knew, even if I didn't know it, what it actually was. I could tell people that it was oak. Oh yeah, there's oak in there. And no matter what, people would always be like, oh yeah, I can taste it. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
So with bourbon, it's like, man, it's the same thing. Like oak, vanilla, caramel. Like, there's all these notes that you'll get in every bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of when people are getting started. But what I try to do is, like, think of an actual memory, or think of something that people can attach to. And there's this other guy that I talked to before, and he took a sip of something, and it had a little bit of cinnamon, kind of like an apple fruit type of note to it. And he was talking about, like, how his grandmother used to bake these apple pies, and
Right.
it's like, man, that's what that reminds me of.
Mhm.
And it's like, that is the connection, right? Because this bottle tasting like oak, it's like, that's not really us,
Yeah.
right? Like, how does that make me want to go buy that?
Well, yeah.
But this person having that connection of a memory
Yeah.
of their grandmother, and this that changes everything.
I think you're right, but I also think that there is such a thing as, like, historical or almost like gene memories, where
right.
Why are we all rigged to? I was just thinking about this. Why is there something in us that is like wood or burnt wood that tastes good, even though most of us haven't lived off of a campfire for our lives? We have a few 100,000 years of living off of fires,
Right.
maybe more than hundreds. I mean, we might be talking millions on that one. I don't know. I can never remember the numbers when it comes to, like, archaeology stuff. But anyway, point is, there may be like a species generated knowledge of that as being something that was good,
Right.
something that we leaned into. And so it could be something that's from a concrete memory of, like, this, like, when I have bourbon from now on, I will specifically think of this day,
Right,
and I'll
sure.
think, oh, it's funny. Yeah. We made this whole family connection. It was this whole
Yeah,
thing. Right.
yeah.
But, there's going to be something else in that bourbon that may be signaling to really deep ancestral things that
Right.
I don't think we fully understand how they happen. I'm big into science. I'm not, advocating anything spiritual here, but, like,
Right.
there's going to be some science of why we're drawn to liking that.
Right.
And I
Sure.
feel like maybe there's something here with bourbon too.
Absolutely.
Been around for a long time, and
Yeah.
and when you think about liquors, it's one of the simplest ways we would have fermented anything.
Right.
Or
Well, and that's where it started, really, is
Yeah.
because they, you had this grain, right, and it either goes bad or gets eaten or
Mhm.
whatever, right? So you have to do something, and if you distill it and sell it, so
Yeah.
So that concept, like I'm really, like I can nerd out about specific bottles and who distills it, but the bourbon history to me is like amazing. Like just bourbon history and American history to me go together. Like, because there was whiskey taxes that helped fund wars, and there's different. They made alcohol to help with the war efforts and different products that they needed, right? So it's just like it's so tied into our history, and even outside of that, they were distilling whiskey way before they came into the Americas. But it's just hearing the history behind all of that to me is just, I don't know. It's
again, and it's part of the buy-in again,
right?
Too.
Yeah, and it's like, man, and that's something that's just is interesting to me. Just like any passion that anybody has.
Yeah,
they learn about it, and it's interesting to them. And like I said, my wife enjoys bourbon, but like when I'm sitting there watching, and it's like, black and white pictures, right, of the history of, and it's like, well, this guy did this back in the 1800s. She's like, okay, well, just
right,
you lost me, right? But for me, I'm just sitting there, and I think the reason I like barbecue, I talked to somebody about this not too long ago. Barbecue and bourbon, both, if you take your time with it, it can make this amazing product. A brisket or pulled pork or something like that. I mean, that may take hours to smoke. And I'm really big on barbecue history and seeing like what they're doing down in Texas or North Carolina or whatever it may be, in their Kansas City, and they're just, this restaurant, it may have taken them, the brisket you're eating on that sandwich they may have been doing that for 3 days, right? So you can't really rush that process. And in the end, it ends up being this great quality product that you're there with a friend, eating or enjoying. So to me, there's so many between barbecue and bourbon that are, it's just so similar to each other. In that sense.
Well, there's a pursuit of perfection there, isn't there?
Right.
First of all, okay, before we go here, so we have another stop on this tour.
We can, if you want to. We can keep going.
I'm here. What time do I need to get out of here?
Yeah,
we're okay for a minute, yeah.
Yeah, so out of the 3, or I guess we're up to 4 now, which ones did you like the most, I guess?
The first one was still my favorite. The first one to me tasted like what I would think of as bourbon. It had a lot less of that like cinnamon. It was on the sweeter side, I think.
Okay.
That was more my vibe.
So
I like something that's kind of smooth too,
Okay. So we will try. See if I can remember the. So we'll try. This is a product from Redwood Empire. They're based out of California, and this is called the Lost Monarch. So it's actually a blend of whiskeys.
Okay.
So technically not classified as a bourbon, but this would be a blend. So we'll try this one.
All right. Beautiful. I think we did good. Still putting together full sentences,
right?
Which
Yeah,
is really
good.
helpful.
Yeah.
But it's only devolving a little
Yeah,
bit.
there's
mentally.
There's water and chocolate chip cookies right there next to you. We're
Keeps
good.
Pass out. Good God, that thing is so rough. What was that? We're second cousins? First cousins once removed, you and me. So Ty and I are second cousins. That's awesome. That's crazy.
You heard it here first, folks.
Yeah, you did.
Literally, as we're finding out, right?
The combined brand is powerful now. Family right here. Toss it. I'll put it on. Okay. Redwood Empire.
Yeah. So this one.
How do you folks like that in your ears when I just
keep moving the mic?
Drop the microphone because it keeps happening. That's the final straw for me. I'm going to fix it. Let's see. Oh.
I'm wondering how. I'm always curious what people's thoughts are on this particular bottle.
It smells fruity.
Right. So we're still going in a different direction.
It smells like you made me an old fashioned, but we just poured that out of a bottle.
Right.
All right. Let's see.
It's almost like perfumey.
Yeah.
More so than what we just had.
Oh, I like that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is a blend, so not classified as a bourbon. So you'll see that sometimes. So you'll see if something's not classified as a bourbon, you may see like a blend of whiskeys, or they may call it an American whiskey, and that's literally because there's. So this is just no. I don't. To my knowledge, nobody does this, but I'm using this as an example. If bourbon has to be at least 51% corn, and I make a whiskey and I make it 50% corn, I can't call it bourbon, but I can call it's an American whiskey because I made it here, right? So there's not. That's just kind of a generalization, but there's also rye and American single malts and things like that we make here. So this would be a blend. And if I remember right on this one, I think this is a blend of their bourbon and rye.
Will it say straight rye whiskeys and straight bourbon whiskeys, aged at least 3 years?
Yep. So they took. That's pretty good memory, especially. What are we in? 5 bottles in now?
Yeah, doing good.
Yeah, so
we're
they
holding
took
together real well. I'm barely doing a podcast anymore.
Well, I do a live stream
listening.
where I'm used to it, but so they took their bourbon and their rye, and they actually sell their bourbon and rye individually. So they took a blend of that and just mixed it together, and this is what came out of that.
This works for me. This is my thing.
Yeah,
I dig this one.
So, and the proof is also lower. So, again, when somebody's getting into whiskey, it's like, so one of the things that's like very controversial in the whiskey community is when somebody says smooth. And that, for some reason, just like bothers me, man, because it's like, what happens
bothers you
is.
that it's controversial, or bothers you that
bothers me
people
that
say
it's
it?
controversial.
Okay.
Because people say, if somebody's drinking whiskey for the first time, and I give them something, or not even the first time, but they're just not as familiar with it as everybody on Reddit, they may say that, oh, that's really smooth. And people that are in whiskey will say, well, what does that really even mean? And to me, it's like, you know what that means.
All right. Sorry, folks. We had a little battery switch issue. I've been doing shorter episodes. It's kind of nice, actually, that we got to that point because I like a bit longer of an episode. It's like, it's fun
gives you
for
time
me.
to actually get into it.
Yeah, well, and today there was no way we could have rushed this, or else I literally just would have stumbled on home. What were we talking about right before that cut out? Man,
smooth thing.
Yeah, smooth. Okay,
so smooth. So to me, when somebody's just, and I don't want to say the bourbon community because there's a lot of people in bourbon that don't like the fact that people make that a thing either. But to me, it's like when somebody says something smooth, it's them saying that this is approachable. This is not as aggressive as a whiskey, right? So there's no burn to it. Like when somebody says smooth, I understand what that means. So So when other people in whiskey say, well, what does smooth really mean? Well, it's like, that's what it means, right?
For someone outside of that world, it seems kind of silly because it's like, you know what smooth means. Right. Smooth means not what I did with that one where I'm like, okay. Right. Yeah, it's...
If I take a butter knife and a regular knife and I, touch it, it's like, this is more smooth, right? So I know what smooth means. Yeah. So, but that's just that's a minor thing, but that's what pops up sometimes.
I mean, all of the small communities are going to have those things where it's like, you're not allowed to do that. Right. These are the rules.
That's where it's like, man, it's like I'm such a big fan of, like, yes, I enjoy all the whiskeys and like I said earlier, I can nerd out with all of them. But to me, the thing I get the most out of is like even what we're doing today. Like, hey, try this, try that. Like seeing what you like, what you don't like, and just kind of figuring out what direction to go into and kind of teaching that side of it. And I don't know, that's what makes me as passionate about bourbon really is that part of it. So that's what I enjoy the most.
Well, I can tell you live it, you're into it. And you've got it, man. What does the future hold? Like where does this go? You keep drinking bourbons? Is there a limit on how much bourbon you can stockpile and review? And sky's the limit, really.
Oh yeah, man. It's like I said, for me, like my boss, she always jokes around that like one day you're gonna just walk in and be like, I'm doing this full time, but, and I'm like, to me, then is it as much fun? I don't know. Maybe we'll figure that out one day, but I don't do this for money. I don't do this for any other reason more than I just enjoy it. And so, I enjoyed it. So that got me to a certain point. but then people that I've never met in real life, asking me about stuff, or, there's been a lot of things that, maybe happen in the whiskey world, and people just send me a message and just say, hey, I tried this, or I tried that. I saw your picture, and, so the liquor store I keep talking about. So there's been people that either I know or just people that follow me on Instagram that have gone to that store and said, hey, I'm buying this bottle because I saw him post that. So to me, it's like, that's crazy to me, because it's like, I could see if I tell you, like, right, go, oh, this is a bottle that you should try.
Right.
And then you go buy, that makes sense to me. But somebody that I've never met, right, and they're going to that store to buy that bottle just because I said I enjoyed it, it's, I don't know, it's still fun for me.
Yeah.
So it's really cool to just see where it goes from there. But
well, that's the good side of the internet.
Right.
Again, just like, I love promoting this concept that, like, this could be such a great thing
Right.
if we all just, like, cared enough to really try and make it a good thing.
Yeah.
But you make this so approachable, and I like how, I could have seen this. I didn't know what to expect, but I could have seen trying bourbons with someone who really knows what they're doing,
Right.
going a whole different way, where
Right.
it's like, no, you're not allowed to describe it like that.
Right.
You're not allowed. And I like that your approach is really anti-pretentious. It's
Yeah.
really welcoming and very much about, this is subjective. We're all just here to have a good time.
Right, absolutely.
But I can tell that you enjoy seeing someone else just try it and get
Right.
into it.
Yeah, and just and I'm sure I'll figure out something. You'll go home with some type of bottles. But
Oh, good Lord. I've had more than enough for the day, for the week,
yeah.
for the month. Even just tasting.
Man, I mean, that's just the thing
right
that's
now.
like, there's people that I've interacted with that they have maybe they do have some nice collections or nice bottles, but they just sit there and they're unopened. And
Yeah.
and there's been people that I've hung out with, and now especially, we're family, right? So that's
Hell
even
yeah.
different. But even more so, it's like when somebody has because to me it's like, I'll always find another bottle, right? And like, if I have that many, and if this person drinks this and they're like, man, I really like it, it's like, take it with you. And so that to me is more important to me than my collection or how many bottles I have or whatever.
It's connection to you.
Right. Absolutely.
This is how you connect with other people. And
Absolutely.
in some ways, I'm sure barbecue is too.
Yeah.
And that matters. And that's great.
Yeah. And that's where, like, me starting the live stream, it was like, man, instead of being, kind of sad that we haven't interacted with as many people lately, like, why not just, I'll just do a weekly show and kind of let the audience guide me.
Yeah.
So instead of me just coming on there and just talking, like, what do they want to see, and who do they want to hear from, or, whatever. And then I'll kind of work that way. But that to me is that same interaction. Obviously not the same, but it's fun to me. I get a chance to interact with people that a lot of them I know, whether it's through social media or in person. But I've gotten there's a lot of benefit to me by having that show. And it's more than just, because you can go on YouTube, and there's a lot of people on YouTube. I watch all of them on YouTube, but there's a lot that they're kind of telling you something. But for me, it's more about the interaction. It's more about
Right.
guiding somebody to a certain direction, or helping them understand the way maybe I didn't understand when I first got into it, and things like that. But
Yeah. Well, I love it, man. I hope you keep doing it. I got to have you back on the show again because it was a lot of fun.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
unfortunately, you have to say yes now because we are
Yeah,
related.
we have to. It's like a mini family reunion. Every
It's
time we do.
true. It's true. Most guests, it's like, oh, will you come back on? And maybe they want to, maybe they don't.
Right.
But you kind of have to now.
Yeah,
unfortunately, so
we pretty much
congrats.
have to. Yeah.
Congrats. All right. So tell everybody where they can find you online and what you have to promote right now.
Sure. So I'm on. I do a weekly show on YouTube and Twitch where I live stream. It's called Bourbon Talk. So if you actually search the Twitch channel or YouTube channel, Ty the Bourbon Guy, I'm on both of those. On Instagram and Twitter, my handle's Ty the Bourbon Guy. So that's pretty much where everybody can find me. And I do reviews on tythebourbonguy.com. Right now, it's kind of under construction, so I'm revamping those. But I have that website. But basically, if you go to Instagram, you can find me on there. And then there's a link that'll have every social media platform on there that I'm on attached
Perfect.
to it. So, yeah.
I'll be joining the live stream to watch and
Yeah, absolutely.
see what's
I'll
up.
have to have you on the live stream at some
That
point,
sounds
right?
fun.
Yeah.
I would love to do that.
Yeah.
Useless, but that'd be
Yeah,
great. Yeah.
that'd be awesome.
And as always, I'll take a few pictures for people if you want to see those, and we'll get those out on Instagram. As always, it's at TXandLife. I think that's it. Thanks for the bourbon. Thanks for the chat.
Yeah, absolutely. Man. Thanks for coming out here.
Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. The family connection's crazy. I love that we could have just not known.
Not known that.
Yeah, if your mom wasn't here, I don't think we would have put it together.
Never.
If I hadn't forgot that battery, we wouldn't have had the time to just be like, oh, wait, who's that?
Right.
So that's hilarious to me. Thank you, everybody, for listening. As always, we will see you on the next episode.